fellow embedded heads. In this video, I'm going to show you how to handle 20 trouble spots that may prevent you from establishing a successful target connection via your SEGGER J-Link. For links and hints, please see the description below. If you're enjoying this video, please like and subscribe. Let's get started. This is a typical SEGGER J-Link debug setup. As you can see, there are a lot of moving parts, maybe more than you realized. If any one of these parts is off, you may run into issues. A very common trouble spot is an outdated J-Link software pack on your computer. Download and install the latest J-Link software pack for your host computer from the SEGGER website, and only use J-Link utilities like J-Link Commander or J-Link Configurator from this latest installation. At the end of the installer, allow the DLL updater to update the J-Link DLL in your IDE or debugger to the latest version as well, if the DLL updater is able to detect it. Outdated J-Link firmware is another common problem area. Once you install the latest J-Link software pack, make sure to use J-Link Configurator or J-Link Commander from that latest software pack to also update the firmware on your J-Link. J-Link Configurator will show you if your J-Link is up to date as much as possible, or if it is running an older firmware version that should be updated. Note that if you have an older J-Link hardware version, SEGGER may have stopped releasing firmware updates for it. Consider making use of SEGGER's trade-in program to get yourself a new J-Link at a discount. If you're debugging with the SEGGER Ozone debugger, you could potentially be using an outdated version. New features and improvements are added frequently, so make sure to download, install, and use the latest Ozone version from the SEGGER website. Also, Ozone comes with its own instance of the J-Link DLL. If your Ozone version is outdated, you might inadvertently be using an outdated version of the J-Link DLL during debugging. During a debug session, Ozone shows you the J-Link DLL version it is using and where it is located on your computer in the debug settings, so you can double-check which version of the J-Link DLL you're actually working with. Your IDE, VS Code extension, or third-party debugger supporting J-Link may also install their own instances of the J-Link DLL or point to a J-Link DLL installed on your computer. If these tools are outdated, and the DLL updater in the J-Link software pack is not able to update the DLL in these tools, you might be using an outdated version of the J-Link DLL during debugging without realizing it. Therefore, make sure to update your IDE, VS Code extension, or third-party debugger frequently. If you don't want to update the complete tool, at least manually update the J-Link DLL the tool is using, either directly or via the SEGGER DLL updater if possible. If you're working with SEGGER Ozone, your Ozone project could potentially contain a host interface setting that does not match your J-Link. Maybe this is because you are debugging somebody else's project, or maybe you switched to a different J-Link. When this is the case, and you're trying to start a debug session, Ozone may simply report a failed connection, but nothing else happens. Therefore, always make sure your host interface setting in the debug settings are aligned with the J-Link you're using for debugging. Not all USB hubs are created equal. Some USB hubs can cause J-Link enumeration issues, usually indicated by a rapidly blinking status LED on the J-Link. Try using a different USB hub, or, better yet, skip the USB hub altogether and connect your J-Link directly to your host computer without going through a USB hub. Not all USB cables are created equal either. Some USB cables have poor quality, or they deliver only power, but don't support data transfer. If your J-Link is giving you trouble, try a different USB cable, or try plugging it into a different USB port. Sometimes that does the trick as well. Also, try to stay clear of USB-A to USB-C or USB-C to USB-A adapters. They can sometimes cause issues as well. If you're trying to access your J-Link via the Ethernet port, but you can't reach it, your host computer and your J-Link may be connected to different subnets. Make sure that your host computer is connected to the same subnet as your J-Link. You can check the IP address of your J-Link and its Ethernet configuration in J-Link Configurator. Also, make sure that your J-Link is configured to use DHCP, which is the default configuration. If your target board doesn't have power, J-Link cannot connect to it. Therefore, make sure the target board is powered. J-Link Ultra and J-Link Pro indicate proper target power supply via the target power input LED. The target MCU supply voltage generally needs to be fed back to the J-Link via its VTREF pin, which is pin 1 of the 20-pin target connector on the J-Link. Watch out for messages from your IDE or debugger about the voltage measured at the VTREF pin. If the target board is designed accordingly, you can also power it via the J-Link. However, for the J-Link to output power on its 5-volt supply pin, which is pin 19 of the 20-pin J-Link target connector, you need to specifically enable this, for example, in J-Link Commander or the J-Link Web Control Panel. Don't power the target board both separately and via the J-Link. There are many different debug adapters available for J-Link from SEGGER and other suppliers. Be sure to pick the right one for your target board. Check the schematics of the debug adapter and make sure the signals match the pinout of your debug header on the target board. Debug adapters don't last forever. You might have a broken ribbon cable or a worn-out pin or socket. If you suspect your debug adapter is giving you trouble, try using a different adapter or adapter cable to see if that helps. It is fairly easy to misalign the debug adapter cable on either side, especially if the connector is not keyed. Make sure the red wire of the ribbon cable is connected to pin 1 of the connector and that the cable header covers both rows of the connector. Remember that many circuit boards these days have multiple devices on them that can be debugged. Make sure you identify the correct access point for each of them so you don't accidentally try to connect to the wrong target device on the board. SEGGER J-Links support thousands of devices. If you are unable to connect to the target device on your board, double-check that the correct target device is selected in the tool that is controlling the J-Link on the host computer. For multi-core devices, also make sure that you are connecting to the exact core you want to connect to. Different target devices, target boards, and debug adapters support different debug interfaces. Make sure to select the appropriate debug interface, like SWD, JTAG, or Fine, etc., for your target board, target device, and debug adapter. Selecting a debug interface speed that is too high can cause trouble with the connection. Make sure to select the appropriate debug interface speed for your J-Link model and target device. Note that using an SWD or JTAG isolator board puts a cap on the maximum interface speed. Sometimes a target board has jumpers or switches that can impact the ability to debug the board with an external debug probe. This is especially likely if the pins used for the debug signals are shared with other peripherals on the MCU. If the target board has an onboard debug probe, then this is also something that can interfere with connecting to the board with an external J-Link debug probe. Check the documentation for your target board to make sure that it is properly configured for external debugging. On Windows computers, you may experience trouble with your SEGGER J-Link if it is configured for the wrong USB driver. Via J-Link Configurator, you can select between using the proprietary SEGGER Legacy USB driver and the WinUSB driver, which is installed by default on modern Windows systems. Select the WinUSB USB driver for newer J-Links and newer Windows machines. Try using the SEGGER USB driver for older setups. Note that you need to manually tick the box during the J-Link software pack installation in order to install the legacy SEGGER USB driver. Just like there are two different USB drivers, there are also two fundamentally different boot modes for J-Link, at least for newer versions. Via J-Link Configurator, you can select between using the SEGGER J-Link mode and one of several SimSys DAP modes. Select the J-Link boot mode for regular operation. This is also the default setting. Select one of the SimSys DAP boot modes if your IDE or debugger expects a SimSys DAP probe and does not have good native J-Link support. If J-Link is no longer able to establish a connection after programming the target device, most likely the newly programmed firmware is blocking debug access by disabling SWD or JTAG, remapping debug pins, entering low power mode, enabling security or readout protection, or crashing very early. Here are some things you can try to recover from this. Try connecting via J-Link Commander first, not the IDE, to rule out any potential IDE issues. Select the exact target device, not just a generic core. This lets the J-Link DLL apply device-specific recovery handling, such as connect under reset, halt in bootloader, or unsecure device. Make sure the target reset pin is actually connected to J-Link, and then connect under reset. Try lowering the SWD or JTAG speed, for example, to 100 kHz. Mass erase, recover, or unsecure the device using J-Link Commander or JFlash. Boot into ROM or the system bootloader if the MCU supports it, so the problematic application in Flash does not run before the debugger connects. To prevent the situation from happening again, try adding a 1-second startup delay before the application code runs during development. This allows the J-Link to reset and halt the MCU before the problematic application code disables the debug connection. And there you have it, fellow embedded heads. Now you know about 20 trouble spots that may prevent you from establishing a successful target connection via your SEGGER J-Link. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. Please also leave your comments below. Thanks for watching.